Hey, everybody, it's Steve Van Tassel coming back at you for Dynasty Owner. And we are here. We're in week 8 of the Dynasty Owner season. And it's time to go through our week 8 preview, which is titled Injured Reserve. Injuries are part of the NFL, they're part of fantasy football. Injured reserve has kind of changed over the years. I can remember back in the day, it was only about 10 years ago, actually. But in 2012, before 2012, teams, if you put somebody on the injured reserve list, they were gone. They were done for the whole year. They didn't get to come back. Now in 2012, they started designating one person who could return, and kind of things moved along, and more players were allowed to return from injury. And then last year, because of COVID, they changed it again, and injured reserve was only 3 weeks long, and unlimited players were allowed to return. So much different than when I grew up with football. And if you're on the injured list, that's it, you're done. But now things are different. And Dynasty Owner, it has an injured reserve list as well. I know very well because mine is packed full of players. I've got 4 teams, and 3 out of the 4 teams have the maximum 3 players on that list. And the 4th one did until I pulled Marquise Valdes-Scantling off the other day, thinking that he might play on Thursday night. But to be honest, my teams aren't as bad as some other ones. I know other people have had many more players on injured reserve than I have. So in fact, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some of the players who are on injured reserve, and see what's going on. But other teams, like I said, have had a lot of people on injured reserve. I saw a couple of teams in other teams on my league where they had like 6 players out, and others still out or injured reserve. So it's just crazy. But fortunately for the 2 teams in our matchup of the week, they only have 1 player combined on the injured reserve list, and they do have a few other injuries, but they're both still doing very well. So it'll be fun to look at that. It'll be fun to look at that game and see full lineups with only a few players questionable. So while we get into it, it's the week 8 preview here. It's titled Injured Reserve. And first, we're going to see, fortunately, most of those guys are not like Rodney. Their arm isn't broken, but Rodney did go on injured reserve. Danny Noonan came in, took care of things, and won the match for him and Ty Webb against Judge Schmales in Caddyshack. So Rodney actually went on the injured reserve. But it turned out well for him. So hopefully all the injured reserves that you have turn out well for you. So first, we're going to talk about week 8. We're going to talk about these guys should be in your starting lineup. And I don't think I have any guys I have guys who are injured, but not injured enough that they're not going to play. First, let's recap week 7. In week 7, I said that you should start Matt Ryan, Devonta Freeman, Marquez Callaway, and Robert Tonyan. And it turns out that those weren't such bad recommendations. Tonyan, this is last week, not last night or Thursday night. Tonyan went for 16.3 Dynasty Owner fantasy points, and that was a good recommendation. Ryan and Freeman, they were okay. Ryan had 23.8 points and Freeman had 12.9. They were really low-end starters or high bench players, so those were just okay. They didn't perform great. They didn't perform terribly. They were a little better than expected, but not bad, so just okay. And the last one was Marquez Callaway. He only had 6.3 points on Monday night as the Saints just gave the ball to Alvin Kamara constantly, and so that was a bad recommendation. But not bad, actually. And so this is 3 consecutive weeks where a good tight end recommendation. So pay attention to those. And I finally have a just okay running back recommendation. So hopefully we're on a streak with those. So let's get into the week 8 starting. We have week 8 starting recommendations. And the first one is quarterback, and it is Teddy Bridgewater from the Denver Broncos. Teddy actually is injured. He's got foot and quadricep injuries. He was knocked out with a concussion in week 4, but he's played through most of it. He only missed half of one game, and that game was the only game that he's actually had less than 10 Dynasty Owner fantasy points. Everything else has pretty much been okay. He's had 4 games with over 20 points, but he hasn't had any games with 30 points. So he's just been okay. And right now he's the QB 16. But this week he gets the Washington football team, and they have a bad defense this year. So I think this might be the first week that Teddy gets over 30 dynasty owner fantasy points, since opposing quarterbacks are averaging 34 against the football team. I think Teddy can do that this week, and I think he's worthy of being in your starting lineup. He's in my beta league starting lineup. I think he should be in yours too. The next player who I recommend starting is Samaje Perine from the Cincinnati Bengals. And he's an interesting case. He is ranked 56, running back 56 right now. But that's because in the first 4 weeks, he only had 8.8 dynasty owner fantasy points. Week 5, he did very well. He had 18.3 points. He sat out week 6 because he was on the COVID list. And then he came back in week 7 and had 14.5 points. So the past 2 games have been very good. And one of the reasons why I like Perine this week is because the Bengals are playing the Jets, and the Jets are pretty dreadful against the run. So I think what will end up happening for him is that there may be some garbage time touchdowns. Last week, J.J. Taylor from the Patriots had 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter, 1-yard touchdown runs. They don't give you clutch scoring points. They still give you 6 dynasty owner fantasy points. And so if Perine can have one of those, he'll be worth starting in your lineup. I think him and Mixon are worthy of starting in your dynasty owner starting lineup this week. The third guy on the list is kind of out in left field, but I like this pick. I think Jamal Agnew from the Jacksonville Jaguars has been playing very well. You may have forgotten because he was on bye last week, but in weeks 5 and 6, after DJ Chark went out with an injury, he was the guy who benefited the most from Chark's injury. Everybody thought it might be Laviska Shenault or Marvin Jones might get more reps and targets, but it turned out that they just started playing Agnew. And I read something that said it's kind of he's playing the role that they kind of envisioned for Travis Etienne before Etienne got hurt. But he's playing a lot. He's played 60% of the offensive snaps in the past 2 weeks, and he's had actually more points combined the last 2 weeks than either Jones or Shenault. That he's had 27.2 dynasty owner fantasy points over the last 2 weeks. So, he's not very highly owned. He's only rostered in 8.3% of dynasty owner leagues. But if you need a guy to plug into your lineup and you've got just under $5 million in salary cap room, his salary is $4.75 million, I think you should pick him up and stick him in that lineup. Last, for the tight end, we have Pat Freiermuth from the Pittsburgh Steelers. He's a rookie and probably overshadowed by the number 4 pick in the NFL draft, Kyle Pitts, the rookie for the Falcons. But he's been the best tight end on the Steelers so far this season. And with Juju Smith-Schuster going out with going on injured reserve because he suffered a shoulder injury. Last week, Freiermuth had, 2 weeks ago, he didn't play last week, he was on bye. 2 weeks ago, he had 12.8 dynasty owner fantasy points. And you may have forgotten about that because last week he was on bye and a lot of people didn't pick him up or think about him because of that. But this week he's playing the Browns, and the Browns have been okay against tight ends. But what they've done is they've had solid games against kind of some of the lesser tight ends, like the Texans, the Bears, and the Cardinals. Before the Cardinals had Zach Ertz, it was Darnell Daniels 1 week, and I think they shut him out. But when they played better tight ends like Noah Fant, he had 8.9 dynasty owner fantasy points, and Donald Parham had 12.9 points. And I'm not even mentioning Travis Kelce, who lit them up in week 1. So I think that with a bunch of tight ends out, Mark Andrews and Darren Waller out this week, Dawson Knox is injured. You kind of have to dip down to find a good tight end if you're in that kind of situation, if you don't have one of the top guys. And I think Freiermuth might be a good guy to have for this week. So next, we're going to talk about guys who should be on your bench or even the practice squad this week. And first, as always, we look at the players from last week. And last week, my bench recommendations were Sam Darnold, Darrell Henderson, Corey Davis, and Mike Gesicki. And these weren't as good as the starter recommendations, which is unusual because usually I'm better with the bench guys. But this week I wasn't as good. Only one good recommendation, and that was Sam Darnold. His return to New York was a colossal flop, as I anticipated. But even I didn't anticipate him only scoring 2.5 dynasty owner fantasy points and getting pulled in the fourth quarter for Philip Walker. The next guy was Henderson, and he had 9.4 points. Kind of when he had more usage than I expected, but he didn't do much with it. But that pick was just okay, as he was kind of a very, very low-end flex option, a very high bench option. But I find that to be just okay. He didn't do as badly as I thought he would do. The other two were kind of, I was trying for a second go around with both guys, and Corey Davis and Mike Gesicki. The first time I hit on them, they both did poorly when I picked them. Second time, not so well. Davis had 14.7 points. Gesicki had 21.5. Both of them scored a touchdown. Both of them should have been in your starting lineup. So that's it. Let's go on to the week 8 recommendations. And, because I can't recommend Sam Darnold again. I'd really like to, but he's QB 19, so you shouldn't be starting him anyways. And the pick for bench quarterback this week is Tom Brady. And I'm kind of upset with myself for picking this, but I don't think I should have done it, but I really looked at the other players and I looked at the other quarterbacks, and I couldn't pick Kyler Murray or Aaron Rodgers because they've already played. Murray had 8.8 dynasty owner fantasy points. He's probably going to be listed in the recap article as the guy you didn't want to start this week, when a lot of people, I'm sure, did, because he's doing great so far. And we've got Lamar Jackson and Derek Carr both out there, top 10 quarterbacks. And I looked at all the other matchups and didn't see anybody I thought was going to do bad. Somebody's always going to do bad every week. It's just inevitable. It might be Kyler Murray already, and I don't have anybody to pick from, but I'm picking the GOAT. And why am I picking him? Because they're playing New Orleans. And as a member of the Buccaneers, he's played 3 games against them, and he's been average at best in 2 of the 3 of them. And the other one, he had 1.4 dynasty owner fantasy points back in week 9 of last year. It was his worst game of the season. And so I think he's probably going to have another bad game. He might not be as bad as he was in week 4 against the Patriots when he had 0 touchdowns and 13.7 points, but I think he's probably not going to have a great game. So I know it's hard. He's the number 1 player. He's the top scorer. If you've got him, you've been riding him and probably riding him to near the top of the Chase standings, but I think he's not going to do well this week and should probably be on your bench. I know I'll come on next week and regret it and everything, but that's my pick. Next, we'll move on from there, and we'll talk about Antonio Gibson from the Washington football team. And this one's kind of sad because, Gibson was a late first, early second round pick, and people had high expectations for him after he finished as the 13th ranked running back last year. And he's got a salary, which is great. I mean, he's got 3 years left on it, and it's just a little over $1.2 million. So people were gobbling him up early. And, he had 2 games at the beginning of the season. Then he had a good 3-game stretch from weeks 3 through 5 where he had a touchdown in each game. And then he just nosedived, and he's averaging only 5 dynasty owner fantasy points per week for the past 2 weeks. In fact, in the 7 games that the football team has played, he's actually been outscored by his teammate, J.D. McKissic, 4 times. So sometimes he's not even the best running back on the football team to have. And speaking of injuries, he's a guy, he probably could go on injured reserve. He's been injured. I think he has it's fracture in his lower leg, but he's been playing hurt most of the season. But just because he's playing hurt and you draft him with a high draft pick doesn't mean you have to put him in your starting lineup. And that's where I think he should be on your bench this week. Sorry. Hopefully you have better options. Next, we're going to double up here at wide receiver, and we're going to pick Mike Evans. And actually, Brady doesn't do well against the Saints. Evans is even worse because he gets shadowed by Marshawn Lattimore. Lattimore, actually last week, him and Evans have had a history. You can look that up, see some videos on YouTube. But last week, Lattimore led up an 81-yard touchdown pass early in the game to DK Metcalf, and then promptly clamped down and shut him down and only allowed him to catch one more pass for 12 yards the rest of the game. And he's been like that when Evans has played against him. Back in 2019, Brady wasn't on the team, but back in 2019, he had a 0. He threw a Blutarski out there in week 5 for his owners. And in his best game last year in 3 games against them, including a playoff game, his best game was 10.4 dynasty owner fantasy points. He had 4 receptions for 64 yards. Actually, in the other 2 games, he had a grand total of 1 reception in each game. Now, the reception went for a touchdown, so he scored a little over 7 points in both games. But still, that's not great. And I think Lattimore's going to shadow him again, especially with Antonio Brown out. And he shut him down before. He'll probably shut him down again. I would have Evans on my bench this week. And finally, at tight end, it's funny because I've got a player on the Bengals in my starting recommendations in Pirine, and I've got CJ Uzomah on my bench recommendations. And that's because he's the tight end 11 right now, which is great. It means he should be a starter, but he's really only had 2 good games. He has 2 touchdown games. He scored over 20 points in both of those games. And the rest of the season, he has 22 dynasty owner fantasy points in the other 5 games. So he either scores 2 touchdowns and is one of the best tight ends of the week, or he does next to nothing for you. And while the Jets are extremely bad against the run, they're actually better against the pass. They've only allowed 7 passing touchdowns this season in their first 6 games, which is actually 3rd best in the NFL. So, I guess teams are just running on them all the time and not passing for touchdowns against them. So I think with the Jets' vulnerability against the run and the fact that Uzomah pretty much needs 2 touchdowns to be worthy of starting, I think it's unlikely, even against the Jets, that he gets those. And so I would keep him on your bench this week. So those are the recommendations. So finally, we'll get to the fun part, at least hopefully for the 2 teams I'm going to preview, and that's the matchup of the week. And we've got a matchup in one of my leagues, actually. I looked around at my leagues to see if there's anybody good, and I found a great matchup, actually. And it turns out that both of these teams have been lucky and kind of avoided the injury bug for the most part. But they are Big Grizz, who you may know as Dave Delp from the live streams. He chats a lot in the live stream, and we appreciate that. Thank you, Dave. And his team is Big Grizz, and they're 5-2. But they have scored the most points in League 76065, which is also known as the Team Polian League, because the Team Polian podcast has a team in this league, which is 5-2 also. But both of them are behind Little Donnie Foundation, who is 6-1. And while Big Grizz, you can read all about it, he's got 5 teams, and this is actually a 5-2 team, and he's 291st in the chase, and it's his worst of 5 teams. So go check that out. It's very interesting. I write a nice paragraph about that, about how his teams have been doing very well this year. But as we see in this matchup, he's projected to lose. In the article, it's about by 3 points. Now it's up to about 4 points. But either way, it's probably going to be a close one. And the winner of this matchup is going to be in first place in that league, probably. It's a league that also has Team Polian, like I said, at 5-2. And it also has our own dynasty owner, Tim, at 5-2. But unless both Tim or Team Polian scores a lot of points this week, and Little Donnie loses, one of these 2 teams is probably still going to be in first place at the end of the week. Both of them, as you can see, have 15 players to play, and they have full lineups, and very few injuries. The major injuries are for Big Grizz. They have Sterling Shepard and T.Y. Hilton as their starting wide receivers right now, and both of those guys are questionable and didn't play last week. So that could be a problem for Big Grizz. But hopefully not. Hopefully we have a good matchup, and we'll see who the best team is. Check the recap art. Make sure you check the recap article on Tuesday to see who wins that big matchup. I'll be interested to see too. So thank you very much for watching the video. I should have mentioned at the beginning, please like the video if you've enjoyed what I've had to say. Hopefully your Dynasty Owner teams don't suffer a lot of injuries. If you had Robert Tonyan, he got injured last night, so hopefully you didn't. Or if you did, you've got replacements on your bench. And speaking of injuries, we've got the Wednesday live stream, which has been featuring the last couple of weeks, Dr. Cousin Justin, Tim's actual cousin, Justin, who's a doctor of physical therapy. We give him a list of injured players, and he does some research on them, finds out about the injuries, and gives us a report on Wednesdays during the live stream about how bad the injury is, what to expect from them, maybe what to expect in the future, when they should be coming back. It's great information. It's only here for Dynasty owners. And so you should check that out. That's the Wednesday 1:00 live stream. Make sure you read all the articles that we're putting out. Watch all the videos, the ones by Jay Pounds and Matt the Jerk. And thanks for doing that. Please smash the like button, and I will see you. You'll be reading me on Tuesday, and you'll see me on Wednesday during the live stream. Thanks a lot. Have a great week. Good luck. Bye.